Joc Pederson hasn't been here long, but I think he's already becoming a Texas Rangers fan favorite.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into today's show talking about Joc Pederson, the Rangers being ranked a top 10 rotation in baseball, and Chris Young making yet another trade. This one is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, Joc Pederson this week had his introductory press conference as a member of the Texas Rangers, signing that 2-year deal worth $17.5 million per year to be the Rangers' DH and not just provide a big old bat in their lineup, but a big old mouth in their clubhouse. This is a guy who has been beloved as one of the most boisterous voices in baseball, a guy who talks the talk and backs it up, a guy who is not afraid to say what's on his mind. And what he said in his first press conference as a member of the Texas Rangers, boy, those are some great quotes. And man, if he can back it up, he is going to be an absolute legend with the Texas Rangers forever. Pederson was talking about the Houston Astros and why their time is done in the AOS. He said, quote, "They put together a nice little run. It's coming to an end. It's time for us to take over the West," end quote. Now, that is the sign of a man who is not afraid of the Houston Astros, who's not afraid of anybody. This is a guy who is loud, who is boisterous, who is that vocal leader in the clubhouse, something that the Rangers really haven't had in the last couple years, actually in quite some time, maybe even since Adrian Beltre retired. Now, the Rangers had leadership, had their own leadership style, had their own clubhouse style that worked very well for them in 2023 and didn't quite work as well for them in 2024. Joc Pederson is an absolute vibes king, as well as being a very, very good baseball player. He is not just being signed for the vibes. He is not Austin Hedges, and it helps when you have a player with the vibes caliber of Austin Hedges, but it helps even more when the caliber of player is even better. A guy who's playing more consistently, a guy who's making more of an impact in the lineup, on the field, day in, day out. Those guys just kind of hold more weight. It's nice having those guys that are in your clubhouse on the fringes of your roster, like a Jankowski, like an Austin Hedges, like whoever else you want to name as the 25th man or whoever on this roster that, people like having around, but your words have a little bit more weight when you're in there every day. And the type of leaders that the Rangers looked for and had in their first World Series run were guys who were the silent type, who didn't talk so much, who didn't like the limelight, who didn't like to chirp and to start stuff, who liked to finish stuff, to go about their business, be great baseball players, and then go home and be an absolute mystery of a personality to the fan base and to the media and to most people. And that's fine. That's totally fine. That's what they're here to do. They're here to play baseball. They're here to be good about it. I'm sure these guys have sparkling personalities that they let show in wondrous ways when people aren't looking. And honestly, I don't blame guys like Semien and Seager and DeGrom. Maybe this is just how they are. I really do think there are some very interesting people behind Seager and Semien that they just don't let show because it doesn't really benefit them to show off their personalities too much, to show too much to the media or to the fan base. They say, I'm here to be a baseball player. I'm going to be a baseball player. You don't need to know more than that. I don't want to talk to you. You're not going to glean anything interesting from me. I'm not going to give you really any spicy quotes. I'm not going to be here to stir the pot. I'm here to play baseball. I'm here to make some money, and I'm here to go home. And honestly, if I was a Major League Baseball player, the way that I've seen it go about and the way it not work out for a lot of different guys who do show off their personality. When things go poorly, when things go well, it's great. But when things go poorly, they can end up getting a lot more criticism. And so I might do the same thing. I might be an incredibly boring baseball player. I like to think of myself as an interesting personality. But if I was a professional baseball player, I probably would play a similar route to those guys. It's just kind of the personality that the Rangers stuck with. No nonsense. Put your head down, nose to the grindstone. Don't don't be too flashy. Don't do too much. Don't have too much, flash, whatever, substance, whatever kind of oomph, pizzazz, jazz, personality, for lack of a better word. They didn't have that. And when you're winning ball games, that's great. That's awesome. Sure. You don't owe the fans that much more. But when you're not winning ball games, when you're not winning a World Series, when you're not, setting a postseason record for the most consecutive road wins, when you're not, defying all odds and winning that first ever World Series, when you're not, winning 90 games, when you're storming out to an incredible start to a season, when you're just playing mediocre baseball, the bad baseball, it's a lot less fun. It's a lot less, there's not much to unify, to have a lightning bolt. I think that's one of the things that I missed the most about Adolis Garcia. I think it was a real loss for this team, him not having a great season, because I say that the Rangers didn't have much personality, much flair, or whatnot in 2023. Adolis Garcia was that. He was the flair. He was the personality. Him and Leody, Zeke Duran, those Latin players. I mean, those guys brought personality. They brought fun. I mean, Adolis Garcia was not boisterous in his quotes, but on the field in his play, boy howdy, was that guy loud. Was that guy fun? Did that guy bring an energy that this team needed, and didn't really have in 2024? It's much easier to bring that kind of an energy when you're playing well, when you're hitting 38 home runs in a season, when you're making your second All-Star team, when you're winning a Gold Glove, when you're beating the absolute crap out of the team you hate the most in the ALCS and setting a record for the most RBIs in a single postseason. It's much easier to be boisterous and flipping bats and stomping around and skipping around the park when you're hitting your fifth home run of a single postseason series. It's much easier to do that. It's not as easy to do that when you're hitting a 206 and you've had a 500 OPS for a month and you're playing terrible defense in the outfield, and just it's the rest of your team is also not doing well, and the team needs you, and you're not able to step up in that way that you would like. It's much harder to be that. It's impossible, really. And Pederson is always going to bring that, no matter how well he's doing, no matter how poorly he's doing. That's always been who he is. It wouldn't be, out of the ordinary. It'd be out of the ordinary if he didn't bring that kind of oomph and pizzazz and that kind of, jolt and spark. And Pederson's not just bringing that bat, which is incredible, one of the best bats on the market, and in terms of just on-field fit, is an ideal fit. But this personality, this, leadership type of role, it works in some types of ways. There are some guys that, boisterously, you wouldn't think it would necessarily fit in this clubhouse of guys who are so, quiet and robotic. I mean, guys like Corey Seager and Jake DeGrom and Marcus Semien. Those are your three big guys, your three highest paid players, your three best players, and they're not exactly the loudest and most boisterous. I mean, Scherzer was one of those, loud vocal leaders who could come into a clubhouse and, say some stuff when stuff needed to be said. Say, hey, we're playing like crap. We need to play better. I need to play better. Joc Pederson is a guy who's got that kind of cachet in the league. He's been in the league for 11 years. He's been an all-star. He's multiple times. He's won multiple World Series rings, including one with Corey Seager. He's also beaten the Astros in the World Series, so he's not afraid of them. Don't look at his stats in that World Series in 2021 with the Braves. They were not pretty. He was not good, but he was a part of that team, and they would not have gotten to the World Series if not for what Joc Pederson did in the earlier rounds, producing a few early Joctober moments as opposed to late Joctober moments. But this is the kind of personality that the Rangers need, and it's not just the bat that he is helping with. And I think that this is an underrated part of why the Rangers signed Joc Pederson, and why I'm really hoping that this doesn't just turn into a one-and-done year deal with Joc Pederson, but he sticks around for the second year, and heck, maybe even adds another at the end of this deal. Coming up, we're going to look at what Adolis' down year did for the Rangers and their spark, why most teams need this kind of a good, sparky player, and the Rangers rotation being ranked higher than the Astros. All that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. You've got all kinds of odds on the NFL, NBA, NHL, also 2025 World Series odds, all kinds of division odds as well. World Series odds right now, the Astros are the favorites in the AL West among World Series odds right now, plus 1,600. Rangers down there at plus 2,300, the ninth best odds. In terms of the division, Joc Pederson is saying that the Astros' time is over top the league, but right now, FanDuel thinks that the Astros are still the favorites, plus 115. The Rangers right there tied now with the Mariners. I don't know how the Mariners jumped up ahead or tying the Rangers with all the nothing they've done this offseason. Both of them second favorite to win the AL West at plus 210. You can check out all the odds on FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. I'll be back next week to 5 shows a week. Be doing my top 30 Rangers prospects. Sorry, I only got in 2 shows this week. Sickness really knocked me out in the middle of this week, but wanted to make sure that I could give you all quality shows when I can give them to you. Then after next week, we'll hopefully know some more about Roki Sasaki, try and get some guests on later here in January. But those top 30 prospects are coming out next week, so be excited for that list. I'll be working on that as soon as I publish this episode. But let's look at what the Rangers got in Joc Pederson. Not only the boisterous voice in the clubhouse, not only the strong left-handed bat that crushes righty pitching, crushes fastballs, but a guy who relates to a bunch of different types of players. You know, he's talked about how he's played many roles in his career. He's been benched, he's been a star, he's been an all-star, he's won championships, but he knows how to relate to younger players, how to let them know, how to go through certain situations, be kind of a mentor type of role, and not just, be the type of leader that you jump in there and say, I'm the leader, so everyone look at me. That's not really an effective type of leader. And sometimes you need different types of leaders than the guys who just put their head down and work hard and you just emulate their style. Those guys are helpful. You need those guys like Marcus Semien, guys like Corey Seager, but occasionally guys who will, be more vocal, who will talk a little bit more to the young players, like a Wyatt Langford, like an Evan Carter, like a Josh Young, to say, hey, here's how I played through something, here's how I went through something similar to what you're going through, and here's what I wish I did differently, or here's what I learned from it, or here's what you're doing really well in this situation. I think having that kind of a vocal leader presence on this roster, who is hopefully playing most every day, if not every day, we'll see what that platoon split kind of looks like if Joc is going to hit against lefties. But most pitchers are right-handed, so he will be playing in the vast majority of games. But I really think that this kind of a spark player, the kind of guy that gives you that edge, that gives you that grit, for lack of an overused word, or an underused word, a guy that gives you that kind of thing, it really does have value to a baseball team. It felt like that one thing that the Rangers were really lacking last year, outside of their entire offense falling off a cliff and the bullpen outside of 2 guys being mostly pretty suspect, and the rotation, while holding together better than expected, the lack of a spark oomph guy kind of felt like a big old missing piece from the 2024 Texas Rangers. But that rotation was better than expected, and this year it's going to be even better. It's so good that ESPN ranks it in the top 10 among rotations in baseball, ranking the Rangers all the way as the 8th best rotation in baseball, the only ones ahead of them, surprising to pretty much nobody. The Seattle Mariners up at the top, Phillies number 2 rotation. I was a little surprised that the Braves made it in at number 3. I like their rotation. They obviously have the reigning Cy Young winner and Chris Sale, who's getting a little bit older. But you look at the depth behind it, it depends on when Spencer Strider gets back, but that's an incredible 1-2, maybe as good a 1-2 combination of the top of the rotation as anybody's got. Spencer Schwellenbach was really, really good last year as a youngster. Reynaldo Lopez, we'll see how much length they get out of him, but you start looking behind that. I mean, Lopez, this is his second year coming back as a converted starter. He was good last year, but not great, and didn't give them a whole lot of innings as a starter. They're losing key pieces to their rotation. They lost Max Fried to the Yankees on that 8-year deal that there was no way in heck they were going to match. They have Bryce Elder as their number 5, who was an all-star and then terrible in the second half. They have Ian Anderson as their number 6 guy listed in this rotation, and that's not a whole lot of depth. We'll see how much they get out of AJ Smith-Shawver and prospect Hurston Waldrep. The Dodgers being all the way down at 4 felt a little surprising with the kind of depth that they're boasting. I mean, if Dustin May is your number 6 starter that's listed, that's a really, really good rotation. Not to mention, that's not even including guys like Landon Knack, who was really good for them last year. Oh, Clayton Kershaw, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer and still has plenty left to give. Young guys like Bobby Miller and Ben Kasparius, who are also really darn good. And that also doesn't include if they sign Roki Sasaki, which I really hope that they don't, because they don't need him. And that would just be so annoying to not like Roki Sasaki. I'd rather like him. Yankees are ahead of the Rangers. The Diamondbacks are ahead of the Rangers with that surprise signing of Corbin Burns. I think that's generous to say that their entire rotation is going to bounce back, because Diamondbacks offense was not what held them back last year. They were the best offense in baseball. And adding one Corbin Burns and hoping that ancient Merrill Kelly starts being healthier and that Brandon Pfaadt suddenly figures out how to be an average middle of the rotation pitcher, and that Zach Gallen comes back and is about Zach Gallen-y and can give them that kind of, bulk that he has given them in years past, but didn't really give them last year. And then your 5 and 6 guys are Eduardo Rodriguez, who was hurt and not great last year, and then Jordan Montgomery, who was just not great last year. And I think he's going to have a better year, but it's such a toxic situation where the owner of your team is flat out said, you suck, and this is a terrible contract, and I hate that this guy's on my team. It's not exactly a thrilling environment for him to thrive. The only other team ahead of the Rangers is the Minnesota Twins. I feel like that's a very accurate statement in terms of their rotation. I mean, the depth that they've got there, the Twins have had a really, really good rotation for years. And so the Rangers knocking in there at 8th. I mean, there's reasons you could say, hey, this is a better rotation than that. Also, why they have John Gray listed as the Rangers' number 2 starter ahead of Jacob deGrom is, I literally can't fathom a reason unless it's literally just based on innings, and even then, no, stop that. Nathan Eovaldi is the Rangers' number 1. No, he's not that. He's the Rangers' number 2. Jacob deGrom is the best pitcher on the whole earth. So let's stop pretending that there are 2 better pitchers in this rotation, that there's 1 better pitcher in this rotation. There's 1 better pitcher in the whole world than Jacob deGrom when he's fully healthy at the peak of his powers that he's been pitching at for the last 3-4 years. He's been just otherworldly. Again, it's all about his health. But then having Kumar Rocker listed as the 5 behind Malley and Bradford, they have rated as an above average pitcher. Rocker they have rated as a star level pitcher. Same with Eovaldi on the 100 rating, where 100 is an average pitcher. They have John Gray is above average at 101. They have Jacob deGrom at 133. They have Nathan Eovaldi at 110, which they classify as a star. They have Rocker at 111, which is a little bit above a star, which I like that. I appreciate that. They have the Rangers, star power as a 7th best in the league. The depth they have at 14. I think that's really low. Granted, given where the Rangers are with the depth, the guys behind Cody Bradford, guys like Jack Leiter, they didn't even include Dane Dunning, who I think is a fine starter. He's been serviceable. If that's your number 7 starter, that's a pretty solidly deep rotation. I mean, you also have Adrian Hauser, who they signed, which I think is plenty of depth. In terms of length, I get the concern there. With Malley, who knows how much length he's giving the Rangers. With deGrom, question mark. At this point, Fangraphs projects him for 152 innings, which I would be thrilled with. Absolutely thrilled to have 150 innings of Jacob deGrom in 2025. I would love that so freaking much. But again, who knows? They have their length at 14, dominance at 5, which is just their strikeout to walk ratio, which Jacob deGrom alone will make that really, really good. Nathan Eovaldi should help that. Kumar Rocker, who is hopefully going to strike out a lot of guys and not walk a lot of guys, that should help that as well. And same with Cody Bradford, who won't strike out that many guys, but won't walk basically anybody. That's a good help for their dominance and AKA their strikeout to walk ratio, which is something that a lot of teams are using as something that is very valuable in measuring how effective their pitching staff is. But behind them, the Houston Astros and the Chicago Cubs. The Astros being down there, way down there in terms of the dominance, them having higher depth than the Rangers, I think sounds absolutely insane. You look at the top two in their rotation, Framber Valdez, Hunter Brown, those are two really, really good pitchers. Brown was fantastic last year, and even down the stretch in 2023, he was much, much better. He got absolutely shelled by home runs in the first half of 2023, then looked much better down the stretch than last year. Unfortunately, looked like yet another really good pitcher that the Astros pulled out of almost nowhere. Spencer Arrighetti turned out to be serviceable, solid middle of the rotation guy, but then behind that, I don't know how much I trust Ronel Blanco to repeat what he did this year. Lance McCullers is listed there as a guy who is maybe going to pitch this year. They've been saying that for, 3 years it's felt like with McCullers, and I honestly keep forgetting that he's even on the Astros, and let alone one of their, I believe, top 5 highest paid players. And then Luis Garcia, also another pitcher who's listed there as a guy who I forgot about because he's been hurt so much the last couple of years and not really been that much of a factor. The Astros are really good at pulling guys that are league average pitchers out of their bums, but you can only do that for so long, especially when you run down the resources that are being poured into the front office and the smart guys that are running it keep going and getting jobs elsewhere. Like, eventually that luck is going to run out, and that ability to pull, serviceable number 3 starters out of literally nowhere like they did with Ronel Blanco. I think that time is hopefully soon coming to an end, and who knows, maybe even after this year they lose Framber Valdez as well, and that rotation gets even thinner than it already was this year, which was pretty darn thin at times. That's a really encouraging sign that it's not just Rangers fans that are thinking highly of this rotation. I think even 8 might be a little low on them, or maybe a little generous. It all depends on a lot of health. There's a lot of question marks on this team, a lot of question marks on what Rocker will be. But there are also some question marks on what the Rangers are going to do with the rest of their 40-man roster. They made some decisions with Joc Pederson, marking open a spot that they traded away, the player who they left off the 40-man roster to make that spot for Joc Pederson. We'll talk about what they got in that trade and some other 40-man spots they could carve open for the rest of the signings that Texas is hopefully going to make for the rest of this offseason. Talk about all that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories last year, I bet you're surprised, that it was going to a baseball game. And getting tickets to those games, it can be kind of tricky unless you have Gametime. Gametime has made it easier, even easier now, to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature called Gametime Fix. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of ticket sites. I was looking to get tickets to a Mavs game or a Stars game recently. It's just such a hassle, and Gametime makes it so easy. Their super deal is particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout, and I love that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. Like I said, next week we'll be back to 5 shows a week, and try and do that as much as I can for the rest of this offseason, of course, into the regular season, talking about my top 30 prospects next week. Now, the Rangers made yet another trade, a little bit of a minor trade with the Milwaukee Brewers, and trading away Grant Anderson, the recently designated for assignment pitcher, for left-handed pitcher Mason Molina, a prospect prospect. That happened on Thursday night. Anderson was designated for assignment to make room on the 40-man roster for Joc Pederson. And the Rangers, I did not think they were going to part as easily as they did with Grant Anderson, the funky throwing righty who had a very, very memorable debut, striking out 7 batters in relief back in his major league debut in Detroit in, I believe that was 2023. Yes, May 31st of 2023. But alas, when you're a funky righty who does not throw all that hard, and your fastball gets hit hard, and your slider gets hit hard, and those are really the only 2 pitches that you have, you usually don't stick on the 40-man all that long. But that will always stick with me, that memorable debut. A guy who was not highly thought of, giving that kind of a moment is just one of the things that I love about baseball, that, no matter what, your prospect status is, no matter what, how hyped you are, whatever, anybody can have a day. If you're good enough to be in the big leagues, you're good enough to have a day where you are the main character. And it's rare that a guy who comes in mop-up duty of relief becomes the main character, a guy who sticks as the 26th man, the last man in the bullpen for a little while, and then goes back down to the AAA, and then comes back up for a couple weeks, and then gets shelled, and then gets sent back down. It's rare that those guys have that kind of a moment, and I love that Grant Anderson did get to have that moment. But he is headed to Milwaukee. The left-handed pitcher, Mason Molina, is a former Red Raider, Tech, also a former Arkansas pitcher, drafted this year, or last year, I guess, technically. I keep forgetting that we are finally in the year 2025. But a lefty listed at 6'2", 230 pounds, got a really good changeup, fastball in the low 90s, had decent success in terms of his strikeout rate in college. 12.5 Ks per nine at Arkansas, 11.7 in his sophomore year at Texas Tech, 11.1 in his freshman year at Texas Tech, but really always had a bit of a walk problem. 4.5 walks per nine in 3 seasons of college ball, including career high 5.6 walks per nine at Arkansas. Only made a couple of starts in the minor leagues so far. He is heading into his age 21 season, turned 21 July 8th, but made 2 starts, 5 shutout innings, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts, 4 hits, no earned runs. Pretty solid stuff in the Carolina League with Milwaukee. I think Carolina is the actual team name, which is so confusing in a Carolina League. Yes, the Carolina Mudcats is where he started his professional career. We'll see what the Rangers end up getting out of him. It wouldn't be the first time that the Brewers took a funky 26th man on the roster, weird arm angle bullpen kind of guy, and turned them into maybe someone who is a pretty good pitcher. I'm thinking Alex Claudio specifically. Granted, he was on the left-handed end of the spectrum, threw way softer than Grant Anderson, and had the most fascinating, weird Bugs Bunny changeup that I think I've ever seen in a prospect. But this is purely about 40-man manipulation, about keeping that roster where it needs to be. The Rangers are hopefully not done making 40-man changes this offseason, because if they are done, then that means this is going to be the roster heading into the season. And again, I talked about it earlier this week that they need more relief pitchers. Hopefully they also sign Roki Sasaki. He would necessitate a spot on the 40-man roster, but there have already been some casualties that have been on this 40-man roster for quite some time, including Owen White being a 40-man casualty, Sam Huff, who I was surprised made it through this year, still on the 40-man, Grant Anderson being another one who made it through on this 40-man roster, at least to this point, that has been gone now. The Rangers also made some trades that cleared up a little bit of 40-man spots. Sandro Fabian is now gone to Japan, but there's, I think, 3 spots the Rangers need to clear up for the rest of this winter. If everything goes ideally, which who knows if it will, there's still very much a plan where this could be, but I think the Rangers need 2 more high leverage relief guys. Hopefully they are Chris Martin and, of course, Kirby Yates. And then the third guy, Roki Sasaki. So 2 minimum, probably. Hopefully 3. I don't see a scenario where they open up a 4th spot, but there's 5 different guys that I am shocked are still here that didn't get cut first. Maybe not that shocked, but a couple of these guys. Luis Crivello, who is a guy who the Rangers claimed off of waivers from the Seattle Mariners, a pitcher who the Mariners thought, fine. I don't really care all that much. I talked to my colleagues at Locked On Mariners to say, hey, is there something the Rangers are missing? Is this someone that was a 40-man casualty that the Mariners are, concerned about losing? Are they worried that he's going to an interdivisional rival? And they said, no, not really. There wasn't anything too special about his profile. I mean, you look at deep dive on his stats, there's nothing all that impressive. And maybe he's fine. Maybe the Rangers see something that other teams don't. But the Mariners are a pretty smart pitching development organization, so outsmarting them on a prospect that they had for years usually isn't something that happens all the time. And then you have Gerson Garabito, who was a solid depth for a team that needed all the depth it could get at pitching. He wasn't horrible, wasn't great. I don't see much more potential to be what he was, which is an up and down guy. Maybe he can give you an emergency start, give you 2-3 innings if you really, really need it. If your bullpen's super taxed on a long road trip, or you had a long road trip with a doubleheader in there, and you really need some guys to just fill in some innings on the B side of a bullpen, he could do a job for you. Not anything all that exciting, but not terrible. Matt Festa, who was fine last year, he's fine. Not anything too exciting. I don't think he's going to be anything more than he was. He had a 4.3 ERA, about a strikeout per inning, not a bad walk rate. Maybe there's something more there. The FIP was a little bit better than the ERA, about a run better. He did pitch in 22 and 2/3 innings last year, but again, not anybody that's all that exciting. And then a couple other guys that are also candidates. Colt Winn, who looked great to start his big league career, and then very quickly looked not quite as great. And then Daniel Robert, who looked fine, but I don't really see him being a big part of this pen. A good feel-good story. He only pitched in 4 games for the Rangers last year, had an ERA around 3, struck out a little bit more than a batter per 9, 3.2 walks per 9 to be precise, 3.18 ERA and 5 2/3 innings. Fine. Finally made his big league debut about a bajillion years after being drafted. Only 7 years after being drafted out of Auburn University, so maybe I take that back. Absolutely kidding. But still, it's not exactly the cream of the crop. There's still 40-man roster spots to cut, and Cole Winn, I think, of these guys, would probably be the last one the Rangers want to cut bait with. Wynn's got the best raw stuff. I still think there's some potential in there. Obviously, nowhere near when the Rangers drafted him as a first-round pick, or even 3 years ago when he was the Rangers minor league pitcher of the year, and everything looked hunky-dory and everything looked great, and then he just forgot how to throw strikes, and that tends to lead to a lot of problems when you can't throw any strikes and you also give up a lot of loud contact. When you are throwing strikes, not exactly a recipe for success, but anyway, that is just some nitpicking for the end of this roster. Some ideas for Chris Young, as I know he's surely listing and hasn't thought of these all himself. But that's going to do it for this week's shows. I'll be back next week talking prospects, having a few interviews recorded, and if some news pops up, then you might get more than 5 episodes next week. But that'll do it for this week's shows. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.